Imagine this, a group of artists, thinkers, and cultural workers coming together to explore a shared yet complex past on their own terms. This is the pulse of Dissolutions, Decolonial Encounters, a project initiated by the Goethe-Institut, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. It challenges dominant narratives and centers the lived experiences and knowledge systems of these regions. It began as a response to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and as an attempt to revitalize cross-border connections between independent countries with histories of colonialism. It soon evolved into a series of residencies involving 19 artists from Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus. 4 groups of artists participated in 4 journeys across 8 countries between 2024 and 2025. Speaking Franziska Höfler, cultural manager at Goethe-Institut Ukraine and a project manager at Dissolutions Project.
So I think right after the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, the Goethe-Institutes in the region of Eastern Europe and Central Asia discussed common projects, so which topics, which formats are interesting for all of them. And at some point, they came up with this topic of post-colonialism.
But before any further steps took shape, there was the name, the title that will hold all of it together. And naming a project like this isn't just about the branding. It's about setting the tone for how you enter complex histories, layered identities, and shifting dynamics.
I think it's pretty obvious that this project can be only one part of a process about decolonization. It focuses only on the cultural sector, and it's only reaching out to 5 handful of artists, but it's a starting point. So this word solution is something we are aiming for, and the word dis in the brackets is something we need in order to reach solutions at one point. So first we have to open up borders, to open up minds, to connect, to discuss, and then we can find the solutions at some point.
It all started with a mapping process. In 2023, 6 experts from Armenia, Moldova, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, and Estonia each contributed a paper. Their task was to map post- and decolonial practices in art, culture, and civil society within their respective local contexts. After discussing the results of this thoughtful work at a small conference in Almaty, one thing became immediately clear. Despite the vast differences between these countries, there were striking connections, common threads, shared tensions, and recurring questions. But there were also deep divergences shaped by each country's unique colonial history and cultural landscape. And that's where the real spark came. Future Dissolutions team realized they didn't want to stop at observation. They wanted to go further, to really dig into those intersections and divergences from a cultural perspective.
We said we would like to continue with this project, make some artistic residencies, and increase the network of the countries, so expand it to all the Central Asian countries, Baltic states, Ukraine, and Caucasus, Romania, Moldova. So 11 countries in total. And invite artists to come together to make connections.
The idea was simple, yet powerful, to create space where they could experience something together, to listen, to learn from one another, to build relationships that go beyond a single project. They hope that this connection will grow into lasting network, one that lives on within the artistic community, beyond borders, and keeps evolving long after the project ends. To bring the residencies to life, the first step was finding the right curators, voices from within the region, with deep roots and real experience in the themes at the heart of this work. The Goethe-Institut handed the curatorial lead to 3 experts: Solvita Krese from Latvia, Lia Dostlieva from Ukraine, and Kamila Smagulova from Kazakhstan, each bringing a unique perspective and already actively engaged in decolonial conversations in their own context. They were responsible for shaping the artist selection, deciding where the residence would happen, and choosing who would host them in each country. That could be a local institution, cultural space, or even an individual with strong community ties. The curators crafted the programs, opened doors into the local scenes, and made sure each residency wasn't just a visit, but a real, grounded exchange. The Goethe-Institut stayed close, coordinating and supporting the process, but made a clear decision to step back from leading. The project was placed in the curators' hands, and that trust has paid off. They brought deep networks, sharp curatorial vision, and connections across the region that made this whole thing not just possible, but meaningful.
I think if we want to deal with this topic in an honest way and really want to find solutions at some point, we need to give the floor to the people who are actually involved in these post-colonial discourses and decolonial practices and not talk about it from an outside perspective. And Goethe-Institut only can have an outside perspective because we are not part of this region. We have Goethe-Instituts in many of these countries, but we are German cultural institutions, so we are not the one who can find the solutions.
Let's hear curators behind this Solutions project.
The main concept was to connect the regions that were long ago very centralized along one metropolitan power.
Speaking Kamila Smagulova from Kazakhstan.
And those regions who are often labeled as post-Soviet by, especially I would say, Western actors and academia and politics and everywhere else. But we are quite critical about this term, and this is not how we position it, because we don't want to reduce those regions to this concept only. So it is about giving space and opportunities for networking.
In the first phase of the Dissolutions project, Kamila contributed a detailed overview of the contemporary art scene and pop culture in Kazakhstan, with a focus on decolonial practices, mapping key voices, movements, and cultural shifts. Later, she joined the second phase as a co-curator.
If we talk about selection process, I would refer to my social science background to maybe call it snowballing sampling of selection. By snowballing sampling, I mean, so we had to ask for our networks, both Lia, Solvita, and me, try to investigate who are these actors, artists who are somehow related to decoloniality in their practice and who define themselves so.
One of the things that sets the project apart from many other artist residencies is this. There's no pressure to produce a finished work by the end of the residency. That's not the goal here. Instead, one of the project's intentions is to spark future cross-border collaborations, to plant seeds for creative relationships that might grow over time, beyond the residency itself. The team behind these solutions sees their role not as setting expectations, but as creating fertile ground, the kind of environment where artists can reflect, connect, and experiment without constraints.
We do track collaborations between people. Because, for example, we had some artists from Baltics who traveled to Central Asia earlier end of last year, last fall, who started, joint projects together. So this is also one of the KPIs. But again, it is a bit hard to measure, I guess. But still, we tried to track what kind of collaborations were there. There was no pressure because people do work in a very tough environment. So it was the space that we wanted them to give, to have some understanding of other regions, but also to maybe relax a little bit and gain inspiration.
Now let's turn to Solvita Krese, another co-curator whose own independent research and interest in the region happened to align with the very idea Goethe-Institut was developing at the same time. Sometimes the right people are already moving in the same direction, and the timing just clicks. In 2023, driven by a personal curiosity and a research trip, Solvita traveled through Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. She also spent time in Georgia and Armenia, what she encountered, the cultural energy, the artistic practices, the urgency of decolonial questions, left a deep impression. When she returned to Latvia, she felt compelled to act. She walked into the local Goethe-Institut in Riga and made the case. A project like this was necessary. There was a clear need for a network, for connection, for something that could support and sustain regional exchange. And then, almost serendipitously, she received an invitation from Goethe-Institut Ukraine to co-curate the Dissolutions project. Two ideas, conceived in parallel, began to converge, a clear sign that the time was right, that this kind of work was not only relevant, but urgently needed.
It was so interesting that those two projects somehow matched together, that they were happening in the same time. So it's really a signal that something like this is needed, that it means that something like this is in the air. So I was really happy to continue my research and my work on this dissolution project, because it opened up more possibilities to explore those regions and to have a deeper understanding and to develop some projects, or to initiate some exchange projects, or inspire artists to start to develop their own praxis or projects in direction of decolonization.
Together with her co-curators, Solvita helped define the theoretical departure point and the broader context for the entire initiative. 2024 was a particularly intense year for the project, with the first two residencies taking place, one in the Baltic states and another in Central Asia. In the Baltics, Solvita and her team at the Latvian Center for the Contemporary Art took on the role of host, working closely with their counterparts in Estonia and Lithuania. For Solvita, one of the most fascinating parts was observing how the participating artists responded to the region, how they engaged with its histories and shifting narratives.
It opened us another possibility to look at ourselves from another perspective. So we just noticed how do we act from perspective of another point of view. And it was also very, I think, important that there was this inner group dynamic, and they really get to know each other, and also some relationships on some common project developments appeared among the group, among themselves, and they even said that why we didn't collaborate before. Now it's just a great platform to start to collaborate.
Another key voice in the project is Lia Dostlieva, an artist and cultural anthropologist who bridges critical theory and creative expression. She's been part of the Dissolutions project from the very beginning. During that early stage, she was responsible for the Ukrainian contribution. In the summer of 2023, Lia authored a detailed piece on colonial and decolonial discourse in Ukraine, offering a snapshot of how these conversations were unfolding in the cultural sphere at the time. When it came to selecting artists for the residency, the curatorial team was guided by a decolonial lens. They weren't just looking for strong portfolios, they were looking for voices actively engaging with the legacy of colonialism and how it continues to shape the present and the future in the local contexts.
This is the main aim of practical dimension of decolonial movements, that we need to create new connections without involvement of this former colonial center. So that's why we need to bring people together. For us, it was very important the practice would be relevant to this decolonial topic. Some people don't call what they do decolonial, but it's decolonial in nature. It's either questioning colonial violence or highlighting this colonial erasure or addressing this injustice or trying to bring justice or just trying to show what happened as a result of this colonial violence or colonial influence.
One of the challenges the project touches on, and that many artists in the region face, is the pressure to navigate Western art institutions in order to gain visibility or recognition. It's a dynamic shaped by unequal access, historical power imbalances, and deeply embedded structures of privilege. Here's how Lia is reflecting on what it really means to build a career as an artist from outside the so-called center of the art world.
It's very Western-oriented, so you have to somehow inbuild yourself in these Western institutions, or you have to meet and impress Western curators if you want to be successful. And this is a problem because you have to get access to them. So there are like many challenges, and you also somehow have to survive in your everyday life. Like, not to starve, get decent housing, get clothes, also like take care of your family. And this is very challenging, I think, especially for young people.
Decolonization isn't a single act. It's a layered, ongoing process. Yes, it starts with the visible, renaming streets that still honor imperial legacies, removing monuments that celebrate the Soviet Empire. But perhaps even more important is the work that happens internally, the decolonization of perception, of how we relate to the past and how it continues to echo through the present. The decolonization of perception, of how we relate to the past and how it continues to echo through the present. And that's where art plays a vital role. Art opens space for reflection. It gives form to what's often unspeakable. It allows us to revisit history not just as something to remember, but as something we can reimagine, and in doing so, begun to heal. In the next episode, we'll hear from the artists themselves, how they confront the weight of the past, challenge inherited narratives, and use their practice to imagine new futures for the regions and beyond. If you don't want to miss the next episodes, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoyed this one, leave a rating or a comment. It really helps others discover it too. You'll find more details about the Dissolutions project in the episode description.